Good morning, good afternoon. Hope everyone is well today. My name is James Rogers. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for OneSource. Got a great cast today, and without further ado, what I'd like to do is introduce our moderator for this session, John Blossom. John, why don't you, if you could, introduce yourself and let's get started.
Thank you, James, and thank you everybody who has come here today for this great seminar on how to crush your quota. And we want to remind people that we have two Twitter hashtags available, hashtag Quota Crusher and hashtag B2BU on Twitter that can help you to feed us questions and to discuss things with one another as this webinar progresses. So feed your questions to us during the webinar. We'll do what we can at the end of this webinar, and the conversation will continue. So I'd like to thank our panelists that have joined us today, and I'll introduce them very briefly in order. Nancy Nardin is the president of Smart Selling Tools, which is at smartsellingtools.com, and she's one of the foremost experts in sales productivity tools. We have Craig Elias, who is the creator of Trigger Event Selling and the chief catalyst of Shift Selling Incorporated, and has been a sales expert for almost 20 years using his Trigger event strategies. And James Rogers, Chief Marketing Officer for OneSource, introduced himself very briefly, and he has been with the company after earlier experience at companies such as Wolters Kluwer and Dun & Bradstreet's Hoover's division and many other companies, and is one of the leading experts in B2B business information services. So we hope that you'll enjoy our presentation today. That's me. I'm John Blossom. I'm an industry analyst who's been covering the content industry for over 20 years in various roles. And I help companies, especially in the B2B space, to make more money with content. So I hope that what we're able to provide for you today in the presentation will be useful. So just as a reminder, there's our question hashtag via Twitter. And these are the reference accounts that you can mention during your tweets to be able to get messages to the right people at the right time. So today's marketing, what brings us here today is something that's as basic as what my marketing teachers taught me a long time ago. We're here to find a need and fill it. And that really hasn't changed in all the time that we've been marketing. What really has changed is the opportunity. And what we discover in sales and marketing today is that it's a lot more difficult for people to be able to filter on mass communications. Less time for decision making is out there. There are fewer resources to analyze vendors. And for me, the solution is targeted marketing, to know more about how you're selling to people and before you contact them. The problem that I think a lot of people experience is how to build both targeted sales calls and call volume. So knowing the right things more efficiently is the key to sales success. So how are we going to go about that? Now, on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a poll that should have popped up there. And let's think about how is it that the percentage of your work time would seem to be just about right for sales call planning. So I'll ask you to click on one of the answers there on the right, and we'll have some polls throughout the presentation today. Click A if you spend less than 5% of your time in a typical workday on sales call planning. B, 5%, C, 10%, D, 15%, or E for more than 15%. So, put your answers together there. We have a little bit of time here for you to be able to enter your information and submit your answers. And we'll take a look at those, as we go on through the presentation here. So, this is what some of the experts have said about how we do spend our planning time. For some people, 5% is the ideal scenario, which means that for the average salesperson out there, you have just a little bit of time to be able to figure out how you're going to be productive in your sales calls. Now, your mileage may vary, but the truth of the matter is that if we spend what little time we have available in a typical day to plan our sales calls more effectively, it's going to make all the difference. So if we start with information that will keep you pointed at well-targeted prospects, and we're able to pivot off that information rapidly, then you're going to do a lot more effectively in your sales call and when new information services, you're going to be able to pivot rapidly instead of double clutching and trying to get to new information that might help you along the way. So, what do we have, though, to help you do that today? We have a host of sales planning tools out there. We have list services, business profiles, news and PR services, and so on. There's an awful lot of stuff out there, but who has the time for all of this? So one of the real time savers that's out there that can help us make better use of our cold call time is timely, accurate, consolidated business information that can speed up identifying strong targets and provide us with some valuable context that can help us to evaluate their needs accurately, and then enable some more highly targeted calls to be planned. I think our overall goal to success is to transform those cold calls into warm leads. And if we know more about our sales targets in context, we're going to be much more effective about that. So in the golden triangle of sales that good content brings us to, you need four things, I think, what I call the 4 C's. Content, all of the right information, curation so that even if it's the right information, you have less noise from that information and more signal that really tells you what you need to do. You need connections to the right people at the right time, the best paths to your prospects, and most of all, you need context, the sorts of services that connect lots of information into a meaningful pattern and that provides you that context in a timely way. And if you assemble all of these into the golden triangle, you can rapidly accelerate your time to a well-targeted sales call. And when you get that, what you wind up with is a wonderful situation where you're using the right information at the right time. And company information is key to that capability. What I call the 4 C's, providing an integrated view of your needs. You need to look at financial performance, strategies, products, and so on. That are the real meat of where people are focused in their business operations. And once you have that information, then you're able to pivot off of that and talk much more intelligently to your customers and speak about their most important needs without guesswork. Without that information, sale time spent, is on probing people is lost. Lack of insight is lost information. Lack of curation means that you're going to be able to not be able to plan your calls effectively. And being able to use social information that might be in that is not going to give you as much useful context if you don't really understand it from a business perspective. So from a content perspective, I think those are the key things that I want to frame in our discussion here today. But let's let the experts talk about it now. And so now I'd like to turn the baton over to Nancy Nardin, who's going to introduce a great presentation. Nancy?
Thanks, John. I appreciate it. And, you brought up some really good points, especially about, efficiency, and that's the area that I care mostly about. So just a quick little background on me. I have been in the industry, been in sales for 25 years. I started out selling for Grid Systems, which was the very first laptop computer. And the reason I wanted to bring that up is because that really was the birth of sales applications. Before we had laptops and portable computers, we didn't have anyone looking at sales automation. We didn't even have PowerPoint. So I've been interested in sales tools for a very long time. My background, as I mentioned, is in sales. I've worked at different research houses and launched my own company about 7 years ago. And although my company is called Smart Selling Tools, the only reason I care about tools is because I want people to be more productive. And tools by themselves mean nothing. It's just all about how can you be more productive and more efficient. Before we get started, I want to ask everyone to fill out this poll and let me know how many of your cold calls end with a voicemail. So it's either 75% or more, all the way down to less than 5%. So just take a minute to answer that question. The reason I ask this question is because it always brings out the fact that cold calling involves a lot of dead ends. Not only do you have to figure out who to call, but when you call them, you end up reaching voicemail. And my focus, as I mentioned, is on sales productivity. And this is a huge issue from the perspective of productivity. Just imagine if you were a UPS driver, and if no one's home to take delivery, you aren't allowed to leave the package. All you can do is leave a notice. And go on to imagine that all day, every day, 25 to 50% or whatever your answer was. Let's say it's 50 to 74%. Imagine that that percentage of packages go undelivered because the person wasn't there to receive them. Now, in that UPS example, it's obvious that a good deal of a driver's time is being wasted if in the end all they do is leave a note. But in sales, what do? We write the wasted effort off by calling it the numbers game. Now, leaving voicemails is just one aspect of waste in the cold calling process, and I'm going to be talking about waste quite a bit. But you can see how it's possible to cold call less and still crush your quota the minute you start to think about where the inefficiencies are and how you can eliminate them. Eliminating inefficiencies in the sales process really is the fastest way to drive revenue growth. You just can't get double-digit revenue growth any other way except by hiring more salespeople. So I'm going to show you how you can actually increase revenue 15% by cold calling less. And I want to start here with a little bit of math, which I have here on the chalkboard. Not many people would disagree with the notion that more quality sales conversations equals more sales. Using conditional mathematics, you might go on to extrapolate and say that if more cold calls equals more quality conversations, and more quality conversations equal more sales, then more cold calls equals more sales. Some of you already know probably what I'm going to say next, but there's a problem with this mathematical formula. So while it's true that more cold calls equal more quality conversations, and there is a direct relationship, something else also increases with more cold calls, and that's the amount of time that's wasted. And I do mean wasted. When I first asked, we did this poll, those that answered 75% or more, you're actually in the norm. It turns out that around 90% of cold calls end with a voicemail. But the next great question to ask is how many voicemails actually get returned? And research shows that 9 seconds is the average time a corporate decision maker will listen to a cold call voicemail before they hang up. And I can guarantee you that many cold call voicemails are not getting returned as a result. So if nothing else, you have to agree that cold calling involves a lot of wasted effort, that it doesn't work. This is what leads a lot of people to say that cold calling is dead. But before you say that cold calling is dead, I want you to consider a few facts. When executive buyers were surveyed, they said that only 8% of salespeople are focused on driving a valuable end result for them. So maybe the problem isn't that cold calling doesn't work. Maybe the problem is that we as sellers aren't doing a good job focusing on buyer needs. And giving up on cold calling altogether is not going to help that problem. Furthermore, salespeople generate 38 to 57% of all leads. This has been confirmed by a number of studies. So that means that a cold call was made somewhere along the line. Give up on cold calling and you'll give up on a big chunk of your leads. The fact that cold calling involves a lot of wasted effort doesn't mean that it's dead. It just means that there's a problem that needs fixing. So let's go back to the UPS example of low delivery rates. No one would say, well, this delivery thing, it just isn't working out. No, they'd say, let's figure out how we can eliminate waste from the process and fix the problem. Now, that's the right approach to cold calling as well. If 38 to 57% of all leads are generated by salespeople, think about how many more can be generated if you eliminate waste and fix the problem. If you do that, you can cold call less and still crush your quota. Let's do a little analysis of cold calling results. Set aside the issue of getting voicemail or reaching disconnected numbers. Taking a look at calls that actually do go through. There are 4 call dispositions, 4 things that can happen. First, you can contact the wrong person. Now, the other possibility is that you actually reach the right person. That's awesome. Now, what do you say to them? Again, Forrester research found only 8% of salespeople are perceived to be focused on driving value for the buyer. If you don't tailor your message to who they are, if you don't have something relevant to say, then it doesn't matter whether they were the right person. You're not going to have a successful outcome. So only one of these 4 possible outcomes is productive use of time. And that's when you contact the right person with the right message. And this is the reason why the numbers game doesn't work. With the numbers game, you're applying the basic math I talked about earlier. You're saying that more cold calling is good because more cold calling leads to more quality conversations. But this is what happens instead. While you get more quality calls, you also get a lot more wasted time. Now let's talk about why the key then is not more cold calls, but rather less wasted time. So I've thrown up a few numbers here, and the reason I want to talk about this is because it has to do with time. Wasted time matters because time is finite. We know there's 365 days in the year, but when you remove weekends, vacation days, and other non-working days, we've calculated that there's only 215 selling days left. That's a number you should remember because that's your sales capacity. Salespeople have only 215 days in the year to reach their quota. That's the equivalent of 1,720 hours. And that sounds like a lot, but it doesn't tell the full story because research shows that only 35% of a salesperson's time is spent with prospects. That means salespeople aren't spending 1,720 hours selling. They're only using 602 hours to sell. So 602 then is the number of hours that salespeople have to communicate with prospects. So let's break that down a little further. 35% equals 2.8 hours of every 8-hour day spent directly communicating to prospects and customers. And by the way, what that looks like on a calendar is this. So you've heard about, you work the first 4 months of the year trying to pay your taxes. Well, this is kind of what it looks like from a sales usage capacity. You really only have a little more than 3 months of actual selling time. So one way to move the efficiency sales needle is to figure out what are salespeople doing during 65% of their non-selling time. And before you say, geez, what the heck are they doing? Don't assume that that's all wasted time because salespeople have a lot to do. They have to write proposals. They have to schedule meetings and follow-ups, update forecasts. They have to do call reports and a whole lot more. So one great way to increase revenue is to move the sales efficiency needle so that salespeople can spend more than 35% of their time selling. And you do that by becoming more efficient at everything else. Another way to increase revenue is to be more effective with the 35% of your selling time. And to do that, you have to make every conversation count. I already talked about the first 2 of these bullet points when I talked about the numbers game. The only cold calling quadrant that counts is the upper right one, calling the right people with the right message. But the third dimension is the right time, and that's Craig's area of expertise, which he's going to be talking about. But my area of expertise is sales productivity, so let's look at time from that perspective. We always say time is money. Well, how much money is it? Let's figure that out. How much money is time? And back to our sales efficiency needle. If we can move the needle 15 points to the left so that 50% of our time is spent selling, we go from 2.8 hours to 4 hours each day. Now, if you have a salesperson generating $1 million a year in revenue, and they increase their selling time by 15%, then they should now, all things being equal, increase their revenue by 15% to $1,150,000. So remember, I told you I'd show you how to increase your revenue by 15%? Well, there you have it. Except I have a surprise for you. Because you can actually increase your revenue by 42.8%. And that's because going from 2.8 hours a day to 4 hours of selling a day is an increase of 42.8%, not 15. So an increase in efficiency results in an even greater increase in revenue. And this is why it's so important to cold call less. If you can eliminate 3 of those 4 quadrants from your cold call results, you'll have no problem moving the needle. And the key is to eliminate wasted effort in the process. Call on the upper right-hand quadrant of prospects. Make more cold calls to the right people with the right message, and you'll have quality conversations. And more quality conversations equals more sales. A lot more, as you saw from the previous slide, $500,000 almost if you have the $1 million territory. So if you'd like to learn more about what I call, refer to this as the 215 principle, referring back to 215 days of the year. If you want to learn more about that or how to eliminate waste from the sales process, feel free to contact me directly. Now, Craig's going to talk about how to contact the right people with the right message, and that has to do with trigger events and timing.
Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, everybody, depending upon where you are. My name is Craig Elias, and as John said, for 20 years, I was just this lucky sales guy. I had this unbelievable knack of just showing up in the right place at the right time, and that happened for almost 20 years. And then one day it stopped, and I couldn't figure it out. So what I did was I took some time. I had some holiday time coming. I took afternoons off, and I reflected on 20 years of success. And I said to myself, when was I good? When was I great? And when was I just unstoppable? And I figured a few things out. Part of what I figured out is that sales, for the most part, is all about timing. So there is such a thing as a silver bullet in sales. When you get in front of the right people at exactly the right time, everything else becomes a whole lot easier. So that was my perspective. I took what I learned. I built a company that was an information exchange related to trigger events. I won a $1 million prize in a $1 billion idea competition. And then I became a dad. So I had to move to California to collect the money. I live in Calgary, Alberta. Became a dad. I went back home, put in place a CEO. And then I got asked to go teach what I had learned to all these people. So what I decided to do was write a book. So I wrote a book about what I learned. And I was pretty fortunate that some people had some nice things to say about it. Within a few months of the book coming out, it was named as one of the top 3 sales books of the year, right behind Jill Conrath and Art Subject. Now, here's what I learned that summer of 2002 when I reflected on all of my successes. The first thing I figured out is that when I'm out there selling, people that I'm selling to are always in one of 3 different buying modes. The first one's called status quo. Here, somebody's done the same thing the same way for so long as just simply keep doing the same old thing. They're on this path. They stay on that path. And when I look back at my success, talking to people who are in the buying mode of status quo, my average close ratio was pretty much 0. And then I started reflecting some more on some of my successes, and I realized that sometimes I would reach people that were in this buying mode called searching for alternatives. So when they're in status quo, they're happy and they're not looking to change. When they're searching for alternatives, they're unhappy and they're doing something about it. And the problem when I reach these people, and the research says this is not just me, is that by the time you reach someone who's already searching for alternatives, it's too late, because 75% of the time, a decision maker has already decided who they're going to buy from by the time they're halfway through the purchase. And the research shows that as a result of that, the odds you're going to win the sale, according to Aberdeen a couple of years ago, is about 16%. Now, here's part of what I find interesting. I have heard of research by Xerox, and Xerox did very similar research in 1967, and they had the exact same number. In almost 50 years, the number has not changed. So this is when I had my third epiphany. My first real epiphany. The first epiphany was that people very often are in this third buying mode, what's called a window of dissatisfaction. Here people are unhappy with what they have, but they're so busy solving other problems, they haven't gotten to this problem yet. Now, when I reflected on all my 6, 7, and 8-figure deals, I realized this is when I got to somebody. And my average close ratio for about 20 years was 80%. It turns out that the industry average, according to Forrester and research done last year, is about 74%. You are 5 times more likely to win the business just because you get in first and help them define the problem, design the solution, and you start developing the relationship. The cool thing is that when you reach people at exactly the right time, not only do you get them as customers, but they're the best customers, customers that are loyal, profitable, and give us what we all want, testimonials and referrals. Now, my argument to everybody on the call is this has happened to you before, and I can prove it. If you were to get a sheet like this, or if you want to download the one that I've got at windowofdissatisfaction.com, list your most recent customers, and then just go down the list and put a check mark next to the ones where you had a shorter sales cycle. Put a check mark next to the ones where it was easy to reach a decision maker. Put a check mark next to the ones where you got a higher price or there wasn't a lot of complaints about the price. And then also list the ones where someone's willing to be a reference. And my argument to you is any of those, the ones that are highlighted in yellow, that have 3 or more check marks next to their name, you reach those people while they're in the window of dissatisfaction. It's happened in the past. I'm going to share with you some ways to make it happen again and again and again in the future. So that's my first epiphany. There's this thing called this window of dissatisfaction. But I couldn't figure something out. What I couldn't figure out is how could somebody be in the buying mode of status quo on Monday, be in the window of dissatisfaction on Wednesday, and be actively engaged in the process of searching for alternatives on Friday. And that's when I realized that people changed based upon very specific events. And I want to make sure everybody understands I'm talking about events, not circumstance. Here's a married man going bald. And every day he wakes up older, grayer, heavier, balder. But he doesn't go by Rogaine, or for those in Europe, Regain, which is that steroidal cream that makes his hair grow, until he has a very specific event. And that event is when he becomes single. And all of a sudden he becomes single. He goes to the gym, he buys a new car, he gets new clothes, and he buys Rogaine. The same is true for business to business. So again, events, not circumstance. A circumstance might be somebody who's got a falling stock price or shrinking margins. Any other way that someone's unhappy with the current solution, that's a circumstance. The events that trigger people to change their buying patterns, make one thing more important than something else, and do something with it. One of my favorites, a change in decision makers. A new decision maker takes a role. They are on average 10 times more likely to buy from you now than the person who was there before. If someone wins a large customer contract, they have money, they can afford to change. Someone who has an event like this, they're up to 8 times more likely to buy now than before they had the event. Sometimes people need a reason to make something happen, to justify a purchase, a change. I love when a competitor launches a product. The whole industry then changes. Sometimes a vendor or a competitor gets acquired. That creates change. I also love when a competitor salesperson moves on. Now, these events come in 3 different flavors. The first one is someone has an event they want to change. You can think of these as funnel fillers. These are the events that put someone in the window of dissatisfaction and make it more likely they're going to take your call. They very often then have to have a second event where they can afford to change, and that moves people farther down the funnel. But it's not until they have the last event where they can justify the change that they finally part with their money and become your customers. And then in 2009, somebody else figured this out. McKinsey did some research. They looked at 20,000 consumers in 5 different industries in 3 different continents. And what they figured out is there are these events that create interest, and then these events where someone finally makes a decision. And part of what's important here is that first event where someone wants to change, as McKinsey says, an interest trigger. This is when somebody creates what's called their initial consideration set. If you're not part of that initial consideration set, odds are you're not going to win the business. Now, in my case, I happen to think there's an extra event in here where someone can all of a sudden afford to change, and then they start the active evaluation. Then a cool thing happened in 2011. Google started talking about the exact same thing. Google now talks about what they say is a zero moment of truth. And this zero moment of truth is created by stimulus, what you now know is an event that makes somebody want to change. So what are these events? Someone has an event they want to change. It comes in three flavors. First of all, the stuff that happens to your competition. They have a bad experience with the current provider. There's a change in people. They change the product. There's some material change in the provider. You can't control this, but you can capitalize on it. The second thing is when there's a change inside your prospect. Again, a change in people, a change in places, or a change in priorities. These are things that you want to take advantage of. This is when something's happened inside the customer. The next thing is the stuff we all try. We try to say, hey, we're better, we're faster, we're cheaper. The dilemma is that more times than not, that doesn't really work. What happens when somebody has an event and they want to change, it takes something and it puts it on their to-do list. The problem is it never makes its way far enough up the list for them to take action. These are the people in the window of dissatisfaction. They won't call you, but if you call them, they will take your call and welcome you in with open arms. Now, it's really important that you reach out to people as soon as possible, because what happens when someone has an event is it turns on this thing called selective perception. Just like when women get pregnant, what do they see all over the place? They see pregnant women. When men buy cars, what do they see all over the road? They see that car. The same thing happens to decision makers. They have an event. They're thinking of changing. Now, all of a sudden, all the stuff that's been hiding in plain sight will jump out to them. So you've got to find a way to reach these people now. Now, I talked about a change in executives. I love a change in executives. When there's someone new inside the organization, they're what's often called a mobilizer. They come along, they want to make change happen. They want to make change happen fast, and they have no or little tie to the current vendor, and they're 10 times more likely to change vendors than the person that was there before. So that's the first event, someone wants to change. I don't have enough time today to talk about the second event, but where someone can afford to change. It's not always about the money. It starts out when they can't afford the time. So for me, I love summers, cold calling in the summer. People have more time. I love cold calling when someone's just about to have fiscal year end and they're doing planning for next year, or right after fiscal year end and they now have budget. The last one is when someone can justify the change. Again, don't have time today to talk about those, but those three things have to happen. Now, if you want to figure out what are the best events for what you do, all you have to do is do what I did for the first time in 20 years back in the summer 2002. And this was my third epiphany. My first epiphany, there's the window of dissatisfaction. My second epiphany, there's these events that cause people to change. Then I had my third epiphany. And for 20 years, for the most part, I kind of did what my sales managers taught me. And one of the things they taught me was what's called a lost sales analysis. If you lose the business, the theory is you don't want to lose the lesson. But for the first time in 20 years, that's not what I'd done. What I'd done is I looked back on 20 years and said, when did I win and what made me win? And for me, curiously enough, in the summer 2002, I went to Google and I looked around and I said, how often people use the term lost sales analysis? And I found 50,000 pages that talked about lost sales analysis. And when I wanted to learn more about how to analyze what I win, I did a search for the phrase, between quotes, the words one sales analysis. In the summer 2002, I only found 2 pages that talked about how to analyze your wins to replicate your biggest wins. So here's my 4 simple questions around the one sales analysis. 1, someone has an event, they get emotional. You got to figure out what is that event, because if you wait too long, the emotion dissipates. So question number 1 is, my apologies, the transitions are busted. Number 1, what event or what events led up to this purchase? You ask this question, they'll tell you about the second event that helped them afford the purchase. We got to figure out what was the first event. So you ask question number 2, when did these events happen? Then they'll tell you what was the first event. Number 3, very front, John talked about context. How is what you're selling relevant to somebody? Ask people, what made you choose us? Don't ask a why question because it makes people defensive. They'll tell you what was the real value they got out of becoming your customer. Last thing for me is really important. Make it easier to become your customer. Now, one of the quotes I'm a big fan of is by a guy named John Daly. And it might be John Daly, my apologies. He's Irish. I don't pronounce it the same way. He says it takes 68% longer to lose a sale than to win one. So the question for me becomes, how do we find a way to lose the deals faster? So I'm a big fan of taking what you've learned from this one sales analysis and figuring out what are the top 5 indicators, qualifying factors that would suggest to you you're going to win the business or not. You create 5 of them, and then you rate opportunities by totaling the scores. If you want the sheet and some instructions, here's the web page to go download it. Here's an example. Okay, you got an opportunity, you got there first, they want to change. That gets you a 2. It happened a little while ago, so it's not a 2, but it's a 1. You're talking to the right person as money, authority, and influence. That's a 2. You're an expert in your field. It doesn't really matter much unless you got referred by somebody or already had an existing relationship, and it has long-term potential. This is an opportunity worth a 7. Doesn't mean you're 7% likely to get it. It just means in the ranking of the opportunities you chase this one first. So for me, the big 3 things were, 1, look at the business that you've won that has the 3 check marks, analyze those wins, take the data, and figure out how you're going to do a better job so you can qualify people faster and get rid of the stuff you're not going to win. And on that note, I'd like to pass it back to James.
Thanks very much, Craig. And now we're going to be hearing from James Rogers of OneSource Information Services. James, are you ready?
I am. Thank you. All right. So I've already introduced myself. I run marketing here for OneSource. And what I'd like to talk about is, I think most of you are familiar with the 0 moment of truth and this concept that in the world that we're in today now, much of the buyer's journey is occurring before they ever engage with the salesperson. And in this case, there's different sources on this. And in this case, Harvard Business Review has done some research that suggests that it's 60% of the purchasing decision was made prior to engaging with a vendor. Another source here is CEB, the Corporate Executive Board, and they talk about the importance of getting into the opportunity early, and that in their research, again, that 57% of the decision process is made before the prospect engages a salesperson. And their research really suggests, again, that the first mover, the early mover advantage is about getting in early, and through that, the chances of winning are increased if you can get in earlier into the journey of the buyer's process. So this all relates back to what we were talking about, what you heard from John and what you heard from Nancy and what you heard from Craig in terms of how critical it is that we continue to do cold calling, but the importance of cold calling accurately. Another aspect of this is about spending your time wisely. We've talked about the efficiency. Nancy was talking about the efficiency and making sure that you're doing as much as you can to qualify and to prioritize and prepare before you call, and the effectiveness. One of the best methods of improving your win rate and improving your revenue is the effectiveness of the call. Well, the other thing that we've seen is how important it is to disqualify as well, about identifying when you're doing your preparation, do it quickly and figure out who you're not going to call so that you can be more effective. And otherwise, if you're not taking this approach, the challenge is that, again, it goes back to being it goes back to the efficiency, and it goes back into all the amount of time that it takes to prepare, and it also goes into a numbers game where you basically would have to be calling everyone, and that's going to reduce your effectiveness. So one of the things that if you're aware or if you're not aware, is OneSource has a solution called iSell, and iSell is a leading solution for us to help with some of these aspects in terms of knowing who to call, when to call, and what to say. It makes it simple for your sales team to reach new customers. It helps simplify their ability to do the research, identify the key prospects that they're going to call. It also has capabilities that Craig was talking about in terms of it has robust sales triggers where you can set triggers that correlate to different things to know when to call and how to be more effective in the cold calling strategy. So one of the things that is important to know about our solution is John was talking about the 4 C's, and he was talking about the importance of content, curation, connections, and context. And one of the things that we do at OneSource that makes the solution so powerful is we address a lot of the sourcing, bringing sources from more than 60 different sources. I actually have a slide where I'll go into more of the kinds of sources, but we bring the sources together. We use this process of dynamic data fusion to correlate the various information to companies and to contacts. And then through that, we provide various business insights through things, analytics, or through our sales triggers and other methods that can identify the key opportunities and basically filter and simplify the vast information to the things that are relevant for you. And then we deliver it. When we say a multi-channel delivery, we deliver it in a variety of different ways that a salesperson can consume it and use it to purpose that for more effective cold calling. And as I mentioned, the best data available, this gives you some sense of there are traditional structured data sources such as corporate information, financial information, contact information, industry information. But then there's also a variety of structured and unstructured information such as media, new media, and social. And the important thing is, again, correlating all of that to company and to contacts and bringing it into a relevant, presented it in a relevant way to the sales team so that they can execute upon it. Our OneSource Dynamic Data Fusion gathers billions of data elements organized by companies and contacts. I'm not going to read this slide to you, but you can see there's over 41 million contacts. There's 11 million verified email addresses. There's real-time intelligence in terms of the news sources and publication. That's a lot of the very relevant information that feeds into the triggers that provides what Craig was talking about, the key events to understand when it's the most effective time to cold call. And so in terms of sales triggers, what we've learned is, again, Craig mentioned many of these, is executive changes, M&A activity, venture capital funding, and so forth. There are various events that we can intercept, we can correlate it to the company or contacts, and we can provide not only the alert to the sales team that there is an event happening there that is a time that there's change occurring and it's probably an opportune time to call into them, but also we provide the information to do the preparation of who the contacts are, the corporate information, the industry that they're in, and so forth, so that you can take advantage of having the most effective call when you actually call them. And so the combination of reducing your research time, because the information is all correlated for you, more easily doing that research, having the triggers that can provide the events that give you an opportunity to know when to call, and then giving the information of who the contacts are so you know who to call, it can make your cold calling much more effective. And as Nancy presented, that effectiveness can improve driving revenue and growing your business. So John, with that, I think I'll turn it back over to you, and we've got some time here to field any Q&A.
Thanks very much. And thanks to James, to Nancy, and to Craig for great presentations, and I hope that they've been very valuable to you. And we encourage you to submit questions either on the chat channel here in WebEx or online via the hashtags that we gave earlier, quote, # quota crusher or # B2BU. In the meantime, I have a couple of kicker offers here. Nancy, you did a great job of outlining some of the cold realities of cold calling, you might call them, and the real money that can result from higher call planning efficiency. But in a lot of instances, people are still using the same tools that result in the inefficiencies that you outlined. Why do you think it is that people have such a hard time moving away from cold calling techniques? And is it purely a dollars and cents issue, or is there a mindset involved also? What do you think, Nancy?
Good question. I think it's more of a mindset, and we need a little bit of education. What's happening is the whole numbers game concept is so firmly embedded in our brains that it's hard to get away from, especially, the sales managers that were in sales back in the day. They had to make these cold calls, and it was all about how many phone calls could you make, and so why can't our sales reps do the same thing? And they feel like they should have to do it too, and that's how they did it, and so it works. And it clearly, there is a lot of waste in that. So part of it is just this whole numbers game mentality. And the other part is just education on sales tools, because still today many people just think about CRM when you ask how much do you have budgeted for sales tools. Well, then they give me their budget for CRM. But there's so many great tools out there. Problem is on the sales side, we're all focused on hitting our number and rarely pull our head up to look at what should we be doing strategically for the year ahead so that we can grow even faster.
That's interesting. That kind of plays back to some of the statistics that we were seeing there, that people have a mindset to go out there and sell because that's what they're paid to do. But the how of the sell is what we've been talking about today, and hopefully people think about the how a lot more carefully. Craig, you did a fantastic job highlighting how a better understanding of what triggers people taking action on needs and wants as a key purchase motivation can get you in front of the right consumers at the right time more easily. Now, in your experience, though, what sort of triggering information is really helping salespeople to identify those moments of truth, to put it in ZMOT terms, most effectively?
Yes.
How is a good system of both sales and triggers analysis changing people's habits in the real world?
So a couple of things in my head. First thing I want to talk about is what's the event that I see drives more people to change, and I love a change in executives. So I'm going to give you an example. Let's pretend that Nancy was a prospect or customer, and she bought from me in the past, and Nancy changes jobs. So the first thing I want to figure out is, when does she change jobs? Because I want to follow her, because she's gone to a new role, which means she probably has more money, more authority, and more influence. I'm going to follow Nancy. But for me, that's not the only thing to do. You want to go talk to Nancy's replacement, because if she was your customer, you want to make sure you keep them as a customer. Now, that's if Nancy was what I would call a friendly, someone who was a customer. But if she was an unfriendly, what I would also want to do is I'd also want to try and reach her boss. But Nancy won't introduce me to her boss because she's got a preferred vendor. Well, Nancy goes, guess what? I can go talk to her boss. No consequence. What I'm going to do is when Nancy's replacement shows up, I'm going to go talk to Nancy's replacement. That's an opportunity. And when I go talk to Nancy's replacement, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask them, where did you come from? Because they've left a place, and someone new is in that role, and they're now on average 10 times more likely to become my customer. So that's the first thing. Second thing is I read Nancy's blog on a regular basis, and she just recently posted about it's the last quarter. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? I think for me, what savvy salespeople understand is in the last quarter, it's not about finding new opportunities. It's about closing the ones you have, which means how can you help somebody understand they can afford to make the purchase, move them farther down the funnel, then how do you help them justify the purchase so they actually go ahead and do something with it? So what I find is the savvy sales reps, they understand depending upon the quarter or the month in the quarter, they have different strategies to find, move, and then close the business that they want.
That's a good way of putting it, and it sounds like information is key to that, to know when to do it, not just because of their relationships, because you know what's happening in the industry and in their work environment. So it sounds like there's a tapestry of things that you're going to have to evaluate.
Yep, totally.
James, OneSource is obviously a leader in providing high-quality business information that people can filter through powerful sales trigger tools, such as we've been talking about today. Now, as you outlined in your presentation, it takes an awful lot of data and a lot of sophisticated analysis and filtering tools to produce sort of triggers that Craig and Nancy are finding valuable. So, what the payoff for that is that you make it easy for salespeople to use the results of your hard work. So how does the quality of your data really make it easy for people to use the 4 C's of content that I mentioned to change their cold calls into those warm relationships with people at the highest moment of need? What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, John, like you said, there's a lot of work that goes into aggregating information from a variety of different sources, but to think that we're just an aggregator it's underplaying the importance of what we're delivering for the salesperson. There's when you talk about your content and you talk about the curation and the connections and the context, it's about not only getting all this information and the algorithms, but understanding this information and correlating this information to the appropriate company and to the appropriate contact. And that's really the secret of the quality, if you will. So the information in of itself isn't as valuable unless you can provide that contextual understanding that this is the information that's relative to this company, and this is the information that's relative to this contact. And through that only gives you the quality and the accuracy of the information to accelerate the research component of this and preparing so that you can have the most informed and intelligent conversation when you do have the cold call. But it's also, you notice that in the sources that there's a significant amount of the sources are media and news information, again with that same underlying underpinning that you have to understand the company and the context to have that correlation, that context, so that again you have the events and the alerts that give you the meaningful events and alerts that are relative to the company that you can correlate then to the context that you know, the in that you know, to again have the conversation to be more effective in the cold call. So I would say there's an aspect of quality, but I would also say that quality is not only derivative on the data, the quality is derivative of the understanding and the correlation of the context.
Thanks a lot, and that's a very good point. In a sense, you're automating that 0 moment of truth for the salesperson. That is, you're trying to help them get ahead of the research curve so that they can make better choices about where they're spending their time with their prospects. And the context is key in that. So it all boils up to a very powerful formula here. So we're at the end of our time here. If there are no other questions out there, I want to thank everybody again for participating in this great educational session here. Craig, Nancy, and James, I think that you all did an excellent job, and it's been my privilege to be hosting this. And we hope that this has been a useful session for you. My name again is John Blossom, and it's been my privilege to host this OneSource B2B University Quota Crusher session for you. And we hope that you tune in for future sessions. Thank you very much, and have a great day.